We're in 15 minutes from what I can see behind. So we are going to have to extend the meeting. We have with us very experienced and able witnesses, all of whom will introduce themselves. I'm given to understand that the Department of Public Safety wishes to go first, then followed by CSIS, then followed by the RCMP, and then followed by CSE. We've asked them each to cut back their remarks to 5 minutes each. And Mr. Clerk, if you could send me the order of people's questions, I would appreciate it. With that, I'll turn it over to the Department of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for the invitation to appear today to discuss ideologically motivated violent extremism in Canada. My name is Dominic Rochon. I'm the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of the National Cybersecurity Branch here at Public Safety Canada. And I'm pleased to be joined today by my colleagues, Tim Hallwig from CSIS, Michael Duhem and Mark Flynn from the RCMP, Arthur Wolshinsky from the Communication Security Establishment, and Jill Werrett, Assistant Deputy Minister at Public Safety Canada, joining us in her role representing the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence. Preventing and countering violent extremism in all its forms is a complex and ever-evolving issue. Effective and sustainable efforts require a comprehensive approach, combining domestic and international efforts and involving a range of stakeholders. Public Safety Canada, its portfolio agencies, and partners such as the Communication Security Establishment have distinct but complementary roles as they relate to violent extremism, the terrorist listings process, and related enforcement measures, which we will be pleased to discuss with you today. Ideologically motivated violent extremism, or IMVE, is the term that Canada has adopted to describe what was previously referred to as right-wing and left-wing extremism. My colleague from CSIS will expand on this in a moment, but in brief, the violent actions and rhetoric of IMVE actors are fueled by white supremacy, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, violent misogyny, and anti-authority, and often all of the above, making IMVE one of the most serious threats that we are facing today. L'inscription de ces groupes sur la liste des entités terroristes est un des outils à la disposition du gouvernement du Canada. En 2019, comme vous vous en souvenez peut-être, le gouvernement du Canada a ajouté à la liste le réseau néo-nazi international Blood and Honor et sa filiale armée Combat 18.
Chair, I'm not getting translation.
Yeah, I'm not getting translation. That's...
Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the interpretation service. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Interpretation service. Okay, Mr. Rochon.
Shall I restart? Shall I continue from where I left off, or would you like me to restart where I started in French?
From where you started in French, I think would be most helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
The violent actions of rhetoric of IMV actors are fueled by white supremacy, and the listing of terrorist entities is one tool that is available to the Government of Canada. In 2019, as you may recall, the Government of Canada added the international neo-Nazi network Blood and Honor and its armed affiliate Combat 18 to the list. Operationally, the listing of B&H and C18 contributed to the removal of the group's online presence. This translates into social media platforms that have had previously sold groups affiliated merchandise, banning any associated accounts, and additionally, Canadian service providers shut down affiliated websites.
New groups on the terrorist list, including an additional 4 IMVE groups, the Russian Imperial Movement, Adam Waffen Division, the Base, and the Proud Boys. Being listed as a terrorist entity can carry significant consequences. Although it is not a crime to be listed, once listed, an entity falls within the definition of a terrorist group in the criminal code, which is an element of several terrorism offenses, including recruitment, training, travel, and terrorist financing. A listing, therefore, may help support criminal investigations by the RCMP that could trigger potential charges. A listing may also trigger non-criminal measures, such as the deregistration of a charity or the inadmissibility of a foreign national into Canada. A broad Government of Canada approach is taken to identify entities to prioritize for listings. This work is then further supported by criminal or security intelligence reports, which are ultimately independently reviewed by the Department of Justice to ensure that entities meet the threshold test as set out in the Criminal Code. It is important to note here that the legal criteria is not restricted to groups who actually commit violent acts. The threshold also applies where there are reasonable grounds to believe that an entity attempted, conspired, or counseled the commission of a terrorist activity. In order to ensure that the listings process is balanced and fair, there are several safeguards built into the regime. A listed entity may request that the Minister of Public Safety recommend to the Governor and Council that it be removed from the list. This can happen at any point. The Criminal Code also allows for a review of the Minister's decision by the federal court. And finally, there is a statutory requirement to review each entity on the list every 5 years to ensure that it merits continued listing. Nous sommes conscients que la lutte contre la menace.
We recognise that addressing the IMVE threat is not only an enforcement or technological issue. The Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence at Public Safety leads the Government of Canada's efforts to prevent and counter radicalisation to violence. The Canada Centre provides funding to support the efforts of researchers and frontline practitioners to understand, prevent and counter radicalisation to violence in Canada through its grants and contributions programs. The Government of Canada is actively working with Five Eyes partners and G7 allies, the technology industry, experts and civil society to more effectively counter ideologically motivated violent extremism in online spaces. Canada is also a signatory to the Christchurch Call to Action to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online. Our government will continue to bring the full range of resources we have to bear in dealing with this issue and to keep our communities safe from violent extremism. Thank you.
Turn the floor over to my colleague, Mr. Hallwig.
Mr. Hallwig for CSIS.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'm grateful for the opportunity today to appear before this committee and appreciate your taking the time to study the issue of MV in Canada. The threat MV poses remains a high priority for CSIS. As mentioned, my name is Tim Hallwig and I'm the Assistant Director of Requirements at CSIS. As the committee is well aware, CSIS has the mandate to investigate threats to the security of Canada, to advise the government on these threats, and to take steps to reduce them. Since 2014, Canadians motivated in whole or in part by extremist ideological views have killed 21 people and wounded 40 others on Canadian soil. This threat is a multifaceted problem, going well beyond law enforcement and national security and requires a whole of government response, engaging social, economic, and security mandates. You will likely hear this refrain from all of my colleagues here today. Using accurate terminology when discussing national security threats, particularly as it relates to violent extremism, is important. In 2019, CSIS, in consultation with other security and intelligence community members and our Five Eyes partners, took a leading role in developing terminology that more accurately reflects and depicts the violent extremist threats facing Canada. Thanks to this effort, the Government of Canada now uses the following terminology in its discussions of the violent extremist threat landscape: religiously motivated violent extremism, politically motivated violent extremism, and ideologically motivated violent extremism. With respect to the MV landscape in particular, our analysis demonstrated that the traditional terms of right-wing and left-wing extremism were overly simplistic and politicizing and did not accurately reflect the complexity of this threat landscape. While it's difficult to perfectly label the threats in this diverse and very fluid landscape, this new terminology, RIMV, PIMV, and MV, was also chosen to mirror existing domestic legislation, Section 2C of the CSIS Act and Section 83 of the Criminal Code. None of these categories are necessarily mutually exclusive, as extremist narratives often derive from the personal grievances of the individual. Even within MV, there are no one-size-fits-all ideology. MV adherents are driven by a range of grievances, ideas and narratives, including conspiracy theories. They may be motivated to commit acts of violence against others or incite violence to achieve societal change. CSIS identifies 4 subcategories of IMVI: xenophobic, gender-driven, anti-authority, and other grievance-driven violence. These categories are not silos, however, and threat actors may be motivated by more than one grievance or shift from one to another. IMVI threat actors continue to target equity-deserving groups, including racialized individuals, religious minorities, LGBTQ2+ community, and women. As we know, it is not illegal to be hateful, racist, or misogynist. Freedom of speech is constitutionally protected, and CSIS is expressly forbidden from investigating lawful dissent, advocacy, and protest. CSIS only investigates threat actors who rise to the threshold outlined by the CSIS Act. The actor must engage in activities that directed toward or in support of the threat or use of acts of serious violence for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective. Only a small fraction of individuals who adhere to the IMVI narratives go beyond the chat rooms to mobilize to violence. CSIS investigates those suspected of posing a threat to national security. Canada working closely with law enforcement partners, including the RCMP, to ensure the appropriate response. The rapid spread of IMVI narratives online adds to this challenge. Online platforms can serve as echo chambers of hate. IMVI adherents are able to connect and communicate anonymously online, and mobilization to violence can occur rapidly. Particularly troubling is the number of youth who are espousing these narratives, inspiring others to violence. The COVID-19 pandemic has only amplified the IMVI threat. We have seen that COVID-19 public health measures have intensified xenophobic and anti-authority narratives, as well as conspiracy theories, some of which rationalize violence. We are continually seeing these narratives play out during the vaccine rollout. In addition to my testimony today, I invite you all to read the 2020 CSIS public report, which we released earlier this spring. It details the very important work that CSIS did last year to keep Canada and Canadians safe in a rapidly evolving threat environment. The public report makes clear that violent extremism continues to capture a significant portion of our attention and our efforts, particularly IMVI-inspired online and real-world threats. IMVI is a complex and multifaceted threat that erodes social cohesion, and CSIS is committed to fulfilling its mandate, working closely with communities and our partners across the country to keep all Canadians safe. Finally, I would like to thank the employees of CSIS, our police colleagues, and everybody else working in the national security space. It's difficult work, often requiring exposure to vile and abhorrent content to detect and investigate these threats, and for that, I thank them. With that, I'll be happy to respond to any questions throughout the session. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hollig. Mr. Duham, 5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président, membres du comité.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good evening. I'm the RCMP Commissioner.
Commissioner Mark Flynn, who is the Executive Director for National Security as well as Protective Policing for the RCMP. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to answer questions about IMV, along with my federal colleagues also impacted by this highly concerning issue. The IMV threat environment is rapidly evolving and complex, and it requires close collaboration among security intelligence partners at all levels, both nationally and internationally. From a law enforcement perspective, hate-motivated violent incidents and criminal threats related to IMV are increasing in frequency across the country. The most common threats actors we see are individuals with no clear group affiliation, who are motivated by highly personalized and nuanced ideologies that lead individuals to incite and or mobilize to violence. Perhaps most importantly, the RCMP is seeing a rampant growth in hateful and IMV content online. We are gravely concerned with the extremist views that are first fostered online, we can and have led to actual physical violence. The RCMP has seen several examples of this evolution, although I can't provide details in this open forum as several of these investigations are either ongoing or currently proceeding through the courts. The increasingly individualized and leaderless nature of this threat environment, combined with the amplifying effect of the online space, carries detection and other challenges that are driving a shift in the RCMP's national security priorities. With this in mind, we are reevaluating elements of our current counterterrorism posture, our strategy for countering IMV threats, and resource capacity requirements. The RCMP takes its preventive mandate very seriously, and the key to prevention is timely information and intervention before it's too late. The nature of the IMV threat also raises jurisdictional and mandate considerations that enhance the need for coordination and information sharing between domestic law enforcement partners and the security and intelligence community. The RCMP's Federal Policing National Security Program is mandated to investigate IMV-related criminal activity that rises to the level of a national security threat as defined in the CSIS Act. As such, we maintain close partnership with CSIS and other domestic security intelligence agencies and engage in tactical information sharing with foreign partners to counter IMV threats. On the other hand, police or jurisdiction have primary responsibility to investigate hate-motivated criminal activity. These jurisdictional realities highlight the importance of law enforcement coordination at all levels to combat this evolving threat and to value of intelligence-led policing. Since there is often overlap between hate-motivated crimes and IMV-related criminality, the RCMP works closely with the police of jurisdiction to identify criminal threats of national security interests and conduct coordinated investigations. We are also working internally to develop uniform guidelines and indicators for assessing when a particular threat or criminal activity falls within the national security mandate of the RCMP. In terms of criminal investigations, the RCMP foremost priority is protecting the safety and security of Canadians. It is also important to note that minority Canadians are disproportionately the victims and not the perpetrators of hate-motivated IMV-related violence. It is incumbent upon the security intelligence community to use every tool at our disposal to protect these communities against violent acts. The RCMP has a robust mandate to prevent criminal activity, and we can pursue various investigative avenues to mitigate potential threats to public safety or national security when brought to our attention. Where criminal charges are applicable, the RCMP works together with Crown Prosecutor, including Public Prosecution Services of Canada, to carefully consider which offences have the best chance of successful prosecution. And on that note, I thank you, and I'm hoping that our presence here, myself and Mark Lynn, can help you clarify the situation with regards to IMV. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. With that, final witness is from CSE. I see lips moving, but I don't see any sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you now.
I apologize. I have a push-to-talk headset, so I will have my finger at the side of my head. I'm not thinking very hard about it. It's just the only way that you'll be able to hear me. So apologies for the technical elements. Alors, encore une fois, merci beaucoup.
So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation to appear today to discuss ideologically motivated violent extremism in Canada. My name is Arthur Wilczynski, and I'm the Assistant Deputy Chief of SIGINT at the Communications Security Establishment, also known as the CSE. CSE, reporting to the Minister of National Defence, is one of Canada's key security and intelligence agencies, with a mandate to provide foreign intelligence in support of a broad range of government priorities. CSE is also the country's lead technical authority for cybersecurity.
As have indicated, the threat landscape as it relates to ideologically motivated violent extremism continues to evolve, amplified through the increased use of the internet and social media by threat actors. Through these outlets, there has been a surge in violent extremist and terrorist media production as groups continue to spread their extremist messaging while attempting to recruit like-minded individuals to their cause and planning activities. Under its foreign intelligence mandate, CSE works to uncover foreign-based extremist efforts to carry out attacks in Canada and abroad, including those that are ideologically motivated. It is important to emphasize that CSE cannot direct its activities at Canadians or at anyone in Canada. Our efforts must be focused on foreign actors outside Canada. In addition to foreign intelligence, CSE can provide technical support to key Government of Canada partners, those in national security or federal policing roles, as well as defense agencies. Any assistance that we provide is conducted under the authorities of the requesting agency and in alignment with the legal and policy parameters of their mandate. CSE has a strong and valuable relationship with our international partners. We regularly share information on a wide range of threat actors, including IMVE. This exchange has a significant effect on protecting our respective countries' safety and security. Monsieur le Président, la collaboration.
Mr. Chairman, addressing ideological motivated violent extremism requires collaboration from multiple partners from across the federal government and beyond. And I want to reassure you that CSE will continue to work within our mandate and with these partners to support efforts to address this challenge. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Witnesses, we'll now turn to our first round of questions, 6 minutes each. Madame Stubbs, Madame Demoff, Madame Michaud, and Mr. Harris, in that order. 6 minutes, Ms. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. For Mr. Holweg, I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on what you touched on there regarding the fluidity of the definitions related to the categories that fall under IMVE, but also with regard to other activities, say under politically motivated and religiously motivated violent extremism. And then also if you could comment on the chart that's in the 2019 report where it does break up subcategories under ideologically motivated violent extremism. It has an extra, there's sort of an extra category that says other. And I'm just wondering, is that a catch-all for mass casualty attacks, or what would be included under there?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So maybe I can start at the bottom because I think I can work my way through that a little bit clearer if I start with the other category, because it helps to describe the narrative in the MV space. So the MV space, the other category, obviously we have four that I articulated at the outset: the xenophobic, linked to white supremacy or neo-Nazi, Nazism, and ethno-nationalism, sorry. Anti-authority and targeted governments, law enforcement, gender-driven, which can lead to violent misogyny. The other category is an example of the fluidity of this environment, because we have a number of individuals that don't have a defined ideologies, aren't linked to a certain conspiracy, or move around the various groups, and it's very difficult to place them. The difficulty in the MV space, unlike some RMVE space, where we have traditional threat actors like Al-Qaeda, we have ISIS, we have a group ideology that these people adhere to. In the MV space, it's quite different. We see a lot of movement depending on the nature of the grievance, and those grievances change all of the time, depending on what situation is happening. We see this in the COVID example, where that has galvanized some individuals in that space. So it's not as fluid as the other typical and more traditional categories in the RMV space.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. It's illuminating, and it makes sense then why the definition also has been adapted to move away from what could be perceived to be partisan or political definitions, but also I think instructive that there probably is a thread of these actors through ideologically motivated violent extremism, as well as religious and political motivated violent extremism, if I've got you right. I wonder if you're able to give us a sense of what the attacks were that caused the death of the 21 individuals cited in the 2020 report. I'm not sure what can be discussed in terms of investigations or which probably all the agencies here or either or might be involved to some degree, but can you really give Canadians a sense of exactly what caused those deaths, which attacks they were?
I absolutely can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So starting in 2014, we have the Moncton shooting perpetrated by Justin Bork. In that shooting, 3 were killed and 2 were wounded. Then 2015, we have the Halifax Mall plot. That plot was disrupted. There was no casualties. 2016, Edmonton stomping attack. There was one individual killed. 2017, that's when we have the Alexandre Bissonnette attack, Quebec City Mosque. 6 individuals killed and 19 wounded in that attack. And then in 2018, we have the Toronto van attack by Alex Manassian. 10 people killed, 16 wounded in that attack. 2019, we have the Sudbury knife attack, and 2 people were wounded in that attack. And then finally in 2020, we have the Toronto spa attack where 1 person was killed and 1 person was wounded. I think I've covered that. I will defer to my colleagues in the RCMP if I've missed anything in that depiction.
Mr. Deham?
No, you've covered it, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you give us a sense of how many plots were foiled last year, say that would have been planned ideologically motivated extremist acts?
Unfortunately, given the nature of this call, I won't be able to get into the specifics of those investigative activities, specifically on the foiled plots. Some of those investigations are still ongoing. I can assure you that your colleagues in NCCOP and the service meet regularly to discuss those classified and have those classified discussions. Thank you.
Can you give a general sense, in terms of scale or scope, like dozens or hundreds or thousands?
Thank you. I can see, and I can say generally that, because the threat activity, we take it very seriously, and we have a lot of assets at play in the organization. We have regions across the country, as you know. We have stations abroad. All of these employees of our organization are working in concert with their law enforcement partners and other members in the SNI community to identify and disrupt this activity. You will know that we have a threat reduction mandate as well in the service. So we actively take measures to try and disrupt plots. Given the fact that the activity has increased, our disruption activity in correlation has increased as well.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Demoff, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, especially on such short notice. Your testimony is very valuable to us. My first question is for CSIS. You mentioned that online hatred and the prevalence of echo chambers of hate, whereby mobilization to violence can occur quite rapidly. The National Firearms Association is a group that shares offensive images online and has shared tweets that have been sympathetic to groups alleged to have IMVE affiliation. One of them, the tweet said, "If the police will not protect you during a violent riot, you will have to protect yourself and others." I have personally been the subject of their comments. Recently, this committee voted to condemn remarks made by the group that discussed guillotining parliamentarians who support gun control, describing what is happening in Canada as tyranny. My question for you is straightforward. We've seen far too many examples where language is later masked as jokes and then turn into real-world violence, either by those making the remarks or those following. So I'm just wondering, what impact do these kinds of comments have on individuals who may be radicalized by them? And should we be calling it out for what it is?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent question. And I think it would be useful at this time if I actually gave us a snapshot of how we investigate in this space from a CSIS perspective. I think it will help articulate the space that we hold vis-a-vis other people in this landscape. So the way that we look at it organizationally is really in 3 tiers. We have the first tier, which we see passive engagement. So there are a lot of books out there, there's videos, there's chat rooms, there's a lot of people listening to some of this violent, abhorrent content. But these people are passive. They're not moving to violence at that stage. When those individuals move to our second tier layer of threat actions, this is more active engagement. This is where we're seeing people not just listening, but they're actually putting some propaganda out there. They're adding content, they're communicating, and they're letting their voices be known. A lot of this still falls in with the freedom of speech, but some of that starts to bleed in what we have the third tier, and that's where the service gets involved. And that third tier sees these people mobilizing to violence or potentially mobilizing to violence. So in that third tier, we're seeing a lot of increased operational security by these individuals. So they're not staying on the open, they're going into more private chat rooms and more encrypted forums. We're seeing a lot of alternate platforms that they go to. So when we look at this third tier, from a service perspective, it's really, really important that we look at, okay, so what actually triggers the CSIS mandate? We have done a lot of work in this space over the last couple of years with our partners in the S&I community. What we require to actually investigate these threats, we need a willingness to kill or inspire others to kill, threat of serious violence, attempting to affect societal change, so not just a personal narrative, but something bigger. And then we need the ideological influence. Once we have those triggers, we're able to investigate these threats. We deconflict on a regular basis with our police colleagues and especially the RCMP, and then we decide who's best positioned to deal with these threats. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
It does, sort of. I'm going to actually turn to the RCMP because in a similar vein, there's been a rampant growth of this type of content online. And you remarked that you were gravely concerned with extremist views that are first fostered online and which can and have led to actual physical violence. And our colleague at CSIS listed a number of them where it did result in injury and death. I'm just wondering who is being targeted, and are you seeing this being racial and gender-based hatred? And are you also seeing it ties to these anti-mask rallies where we're seeing neo-Nazi flags being flown?
A little more than a minute, please.
Okay, thank you for your question. What we're seeing is, I'll call it the vulnerable groups are more targeted than the general population. And it's important to note that we make a distinction between IMV and also hate-motivated crime. What we're dealing with is a lot of hate-motivated crime comments that are made that are covered under the Criminal Code of Canada. And there is a difference there where there's specific sections in the code to deal with the hate-motivated crime. And on the other side, as Tim mentioned earlier with the IMVE, there's a deep-rooted ideology that's more complex than just hatred to the things. Links with I don't have any information to say there's links with different flags that are being shown at protests. We take every complaint seriously and investigate every complaint that comes across that is reported to us. Mark, not quite sure if there's anything you wish to add.
Yeah, that was on at CBC at a rally in Saskatoon where I saw that.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's my time, Chair.
Yeah, you're up at 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Madame Michaud, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
6 minutes, Ms. Michaud. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for your attendance. Last week we had Mr. McGuinty from the NCCOP, the parliamentarians group. He presented their annual report, State of Affairs, made recommendations to the government, but I was particularly interested in how the government or the Department of Public Safety sees this threat landscape and how it's responding to it. And terrorism was still identified as the biggest threat to Canada currently. But I'm wondering, with the resurgence of IMVE, is that a form of terrorism per se? And I'd direct my question at Mr. Rochon or Mr. Werrett from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. And if others wish to add, please feel free to do so. Well, thank you very much for the question. It's perhaps more appropriate for the RCMP or CSIS to comment on their definition of what a threat actually is or constitutes. But I think the quickest response I can give you, the most concise response, as my colleagues remarked, this is a teamwork at the end of the day. It's a highly complicated issue. And it is true that to date, terrorism was and has been the most quote-unquote demanding threat, if you will, and a subcategory of that threat is violent extremism. It's part of terrorism in a sense, but as my colleagues from CSIS in particular explained, we need better definitions. So recently, we have gone about defining what these various categories are in order to better identify the sources of these threats in order to, by extension, better respond to them. I hope I've responded to your question. I don't know if my colleagues from the RCMP or CSIS would like to add anything. Well, all I would add is this. Your question was about IMVE and terrorism. Sometimes there are crimes that do not fit comfortably under the IMVE category. And then there is an investigation that takes place, and we discover that there is, in fact, an IMVE component to it. So one case in May 2020 in Toronto, where the investigation determined that the individual was part of an incel group, which wasn't listed per se, but given that there was a ideologically motivated element to their actions, a terrorism charge was successfully laid. So yes, IMVE does have a terrorism component because there are groups listed on the terrorist list. Thank you very much. Yes, it's not a good acronym in French either. EVCI, no better than IMVE. But on a more serious note, social networks, well, extremist groups rely on social networks such as Facebook, Twitter. Some have even been banned from them, but they're there to spread disinformation, to radicalize people. And some people believe that by closing off some platforms, well, it won't be beneficial or advantageous at the end of the day, because people will go into the darker realms of the internet, the dark web, and be further hidden under multiple layers. Now, whether or not it's on everyday platforms such as Facebook or Twitter or these other clandestine platforms, how can the RCMP, CSIS intervene to detect these groups, whether they're sharing videos or whether they're engaging in hate speech? Do you intervene with private corporations? How do you go about your interventions? Well, I could take a stab at that for the RCMP in respect of internet sites. Well, the lion's share of our investigations on hate speech on social networks have been observed by whistleblowers, people who see hate speech on websites, and then an investigation is often launched. Now, sometimes social networks withdraw information without advising us, and we don't get that information. But it's common to what happens in everyday life when someone calls the police and action is taken. That same thing happens with social media. Now, if these companies do withdraw the information without advising us, well, of course, there is no basis for further investigation to a complaint. Now, sometimes there are hateful comments, hate speech on the internet, and that will spark an investigation by the RCMP that we carry through to its full course. And it's quite a challenge because when you are on a social network, there's a whole lot of mechanisms that you can use to hide yourself. This is a major source of concern, and it's not just a problem with social media. For example, when there's new legislation, a new process, people find a way of circumventing it. You've all heard about the dark web. And of course, a lot of folks have infiltrated the dark web who are IMVE-related groups.
Unfortunately, your time is up, Madame Michaud. Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for enlightening us on some of these issues that are increasingly concerning. First of all, I just would like perhaps Inspector Holloway could deal with this question. It's been suggested to us by the SECU report that there are more than 300 of these type of groups, IMVE groups, active in Canada. That seems to be an enormous number. Is it the tier 3 that makes them a group? How organized do they have to be considered such?
It's a very great question. I would respond first by saying that is the complexity of this investigative effort that we undertake. Because a lot of the personal grievances, a lot of the conspiracy theories are not tied to one solid ideology that motivates a lot of other people. So there are a lot of individuals that might move from one to another very quickly. From a CSIS perspective, it is absolutely crucial that we reach the threshold of violence or threat of violence, and the 4 steps that I talked about a little bit earlier before we can actively investigate. In terms of the overall numbers, yes, if we look at this like a funnel, and that top tier I discussed, there are hundreds of different narratives out there, different ideologies, different conspiracy theories. A lot of that still falls into the free speech space. A lot of those individuals will just remain passive. They will not mobilize to violence, ergo not, affecting our act from a CSIS perspective. I hope that answers your question.
To some extent, so in this tier 3 groups, I guess that's where we're talking about the 300. Are there in any one particular type? I mean, we're talking about a propensity to violence or plans for violence or suggestions of violence. Is there a predominant group within the 300? I mean, we don't have 300 categories. We have, you've outlined several in terms of either, motivated by particular ideology or white supremacy or anti-authority or xenophobia, with some overlap, obviously. Can you categorize them for us and tell us what the predominant group is, if there is one?
The predominant ideologies that I discussed at the outset, I think those are them from our perspective anyway. So the neo-Nazism and the ethno-nationalism is one of the major ones. Your anti-authority and targeting government and law enforcement is also an ideology, both in North America, in the United States, and here, that is a concern. The gender-driven violent misogyny, I mentioned some of the attacks that have taken place on our soil were driven in part, in whole or in part, by that ideology. And then the other category that we discussed, where somebody didn't have an affixed ideology, but had some personal grievances and a lot of different things going on. So again, those are the predominant ideologies, but there's a lot of movement in that space. The fluidity of that space makes it one of the most complex investigations. I will defer to my other colleagues, but I'll say I've been in this business for well over 20 years and actively engaged in these investigations for a long time. And it is a complicated space for all of us. But with our various mandates working in concert and together, I think we're making a dent in not only identifying and making sure that we are up on the threat. And to do that, in all honesty, from a CSIS perspective, we have to ensure that we have the right mandate. We have to ensure that we have the right tools at our disposal. And that includes modernization of our legislation to make sure we can deal with these threats as they emerge. Thank you very much.
You have less than 2 minutes, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell us whether you have figured out, and this is probably something that you all wonder about, what motivates an individual, or can you identify what triggers someone to move from the tier 2 to the tier 3? Is that something beyond your ken, or are you just watching to see what happens?
No, it's definitely something that we analyze every day, all day. So the movement between the tiers is an interesting one because unlike a lot of the RIMV or other groups, the movement can happen very quickly. People can mobilize to that third tier and mobilize to violence very quickly. We've seen it go from the first tier to the third tier without much warning in between. We've also seen the opposite. We've seen where people get to that third tier and they say, oh boy, we didn't realize that this is what we were getting into, and they move back up into that more passive space. So we've really seen a mixed bag on this, but it is absolutely something that we monitor actively.
Good question. The Proud Boys were declared a terrorist group. They've disbanded. What does that mean? Or that mean that they're dispersed into other groups, or that doesn't mean that they've changed their ideology or their thoughts or their beliefs? I wouldn't think. What do you think happens?
I'm not sure on that case, but I can't speak of things that were monitored actively in the investigation space, but that Proud Boys is probably indicative of a lot of other areas. So there will be some pockets of a broader ideology that might be mobilized to violence. There will be others that are still up in that top tier. It doesn't mean just because somebody is a Proud Boy, I think that they're actively mobilized to violence. So we see that different strata all the time in these groups, and that's what makes it very difficult to monitor actively. Thank you,
Mr. Harris. Now moving to the second round, 5 minutes to Mr. Manpopta, followed by Mr. Fisher.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being with us here today and enlightening us on this very important topic. I'm just going to follow with the previous line of questioning with Mr. Hallweg, if you don't mind. So there's been quite a bit of talk today about the 3 different categories of extreme motivation for violent extremism, and I wonder how important it is to define those different categories. Like, for example, one of the witnesses had mentioned the 21 deaths that occurred at the hands of ideologically motivated extreme actors, one of them being the Quebec mosque shooting. I would have thought maybe that falls within the religiously motivated. So how important is it, Mr. Hallweg, to get those categorizations right? And how is that a tool for CSIS to keep Canadians safe and for prosecutions?
I think it's an outstanding question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The way we look at this, and I think from a service lens anyway, I can articulate that, the mosque shooting. So we look at things that trigger our act. So 2C of our act, that is what defines whether or not we get involved from a service perspective. So the serious acts of violence. Whether that falls into the RIMV space, the religiously motivated, the IMV space, that is actually where we mobilize and prioritize our investigative activity from an internal perspective. But it is the trigger of our 2C threshold in our mandate that dictates whether or not we're going to go into that space. I think it is very important to articulate, and why we chose to do so in 219 in the MV space, are really articulate the complexity of this investigation. So that we can actively portray what is going on, and we can actively decide when our threshold and our mandate is triggered. Otherwise, that deconfliction with the RCMP, that deconfliction with others in the community is crucial, because at the end of the day, we're all looking to prevent threats of violence. Thank you.
Good, thank you. So what tools does that give you for prosecution? You talked about the 4 trigger points. Maybe you could just expand on that a little bit so that I understand it better.
So a very good point that you made on prosecution, because that is the lane of our good friends at the RCMP and other police jurisdictions.
Or not.
From a CSIS perspective, those 4 triggers, as we've called them, the willingness to inspire others, to kill others, serious violence, attempting to affect societal change, and ideological influence. It is very crucial for us to go through all of these steps, understand what the individual is doing in these spaces, so that we can make sure that we are deconflicting with our counterparts to understand who is best positioned to deal with this threat. Is it the RCMP? Is it local law enforcement? Or is it a service perspective where that person hasn't gone to that outer extreme, and we might be able to inform others so that they can fulfill their mandate a little bit more effectively? Thank you.
Good, thank you. Do I still have a minute left, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, a minute and a half.
Okay, good. I'm not sure who this question is to, but it is about Canadians. It was called CET, Canadian Extremist Travelers. People who've gone abroad to fight for Al Qaeda or Daesh in Syria or wherever, and then they're coming back as Canadian citizens. How big of a threat is that to Canada? That to me seems like a real and present danger for Canadians. I'm not sure who that's to. Maybe to the RCMP.
Well, okay, I'll lead it off, Mr. Chair, but I think there's a little bit of public safety and also CSIS in this. What's important here is the RCMP's mandate when it comes to national security and IMVE is really our sandbox is when there's a criminal element. And Tim mentioned how we work well together. We do work well. We deconflict as to who will take the lead. But when there's a criminal element to the file, it becomes our responsibility. We still work closely with the service throughout. So on the returnees, if you wish, we are looking at a list of people that have gone there that we were investigating before and know they've been involved in criminal activity. So the service would have a different list, if you wish, based on their mandate and the intel. Do they pose a threat? There are several discussions with the community on how to best follow up on that when they do return, if they do return or when they do return, and make sure that we have the appropriate resources and the eyes and the information on it. Because you can appreciate when someone has left the country for 6, 7, 10 years, you no longer have a picture, an intel picture of what's going on or what they've been involved. So it's not an easy issue, but the community is together and monitoring it closely to make sure that we have the right resources in place to address it.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of the witnesses. This is incredibly compelling testimony, and I want to thank you for being here. Personally, I'm glad that we're talking about this today. In my riding of Dartmouth Cole Harbour, people are really extremely concerned about organizations such as was mentioned earlier, the Proud Boys. So my question would be, I guess, for Mr. Rochon at Public Safety. It was not until 2019 that two ideologically motivated white supremacist organizations, and they were mentioned here today, Blood and Honor, or I think they called it B&H, and Combat 18, C18, were added to the terrorist code listings. Earlier this year, there were 4 additional groups added, including the Proud Boys. And I touched on this with Mr. McGinty the other day, but what is the goal that you hope to accomplish through the listings process, and what message does it send to Canadians?
Well, thank you for the question. And frankly, I think I may have done Madame Michaud a disservice earlier, because I think that's where she was getting at in terms of IMVE and terrorism and where do the two somewhat meet. And frankly, the question that was just asked about Canadian extremist travelers touches on that issue as well. These are not mutually exclusive categories, and it's a very complex situation. And so in order to address ideologically motivated violent extremism, religiously motivated violent extremism, and all the various things that we're now starting to define, we need to make best use of the tools that we have at our disposal. I would say the criminal code listing regime is one of those tools. I think we've been talking about national security criminal investigations or CSIS investigations as other potential tools. You have the Security Air Travel Act, which is another tool. We have the Terrorism Peace Bond provision, which is another tool. So these are all tools to help us deal with the evolution of the threats that we're seeing. And up until 2019, as you rightly point out, ideologically motivated violent extremism as such was not part of an entity that had been listed up until then. But Canada was one of the first Five Eyes countries to actually list, as you point out, back in 2019, these types of groups. And earlier this year, we've added another 4. I think that shows that there's a trend, an identification that the criminal code definition of what terrorist activity is in order to be able to list an entity, that these IMVE groups are starting to meet that threshold. And as they meet that threshold, we're starting to list those entities, and yet another tool to bring to bear on being able to deal with them.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that. Someone had claimed in testimony that neo-Nazi groups, two neo-Nazi groups, no longer have an online presence. And Mr. Harris touched on this as well. So maybe you can just reinforce this. Is there a concern that these organizations could, morph into something else or go deeper underground, or, because they don't give up on this level of hate that they have within themselves?
I'll take a stab at answering that. I think my colleague from CSIS, Mr. Hallwig, certainly did a good job of describing the dangers that, of course, will continue to happen once you start listing these entities. By default, listing them does enable social media platforms to remove these entities. And what I mean by that is they might have a social media presence in order to be able to try and raise funds for their cause, for example. And being listed allows social media platforms to say, well, no, we're not going to be selling T-shirts to promote your particular ideology. And as such, they start removing that particular presence. That doesn't mean that you're eradicating their presence in terms of their ability to propagate. And I think it was my colleague from the RCMP, Mr. Duhem, that mentioned that inevitably what they will do is they will revert to going to the dark web, or they will revert to going to encrypted channels or hidden channels to be able to continue to spread their rhetoric. But at least they're not going to be able to do it as overtly by using the tool that is the criminal code listing. As I say, the criminal code listing is just but one tool. It does help with certain aspects, but it does then push us further downstream to have to try and then cope with some of the challenges of the spreading of their rhetoric in other avenues.
You have about 15 seconds.
Okay, a quick one then. How does Canada's approach, broadly speaking, match up to other like-minded countries? Are we a leader in this?
Very quickly, I'd like to think that we're certainly at the table and we're shoulder to shoulder with our Five Eyes partners and others in terms of trying to address this issue. And it's not an issue that Canada faces alone by any stretch.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
2.5 minutes pour...
2.5 minutes, Madame Michaud. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your answers earlier. I'd like to continue with the same line of questioning. You said that when a situation is brought to your attention, the RCMP can intervene. It's not necessarily an individual that files an official complaint, but someone might blow the whistle or report an incident. And I imagine that you can list or document the kinds of violent or IMVE incidents. And that makes me think of these involuntary single persons and the charges that were charges that were laid. There's been an increase in femicides, an increase in violence against women. This is an extremely concerning movement that is burgeoning. How do you address that violence against women? Well, what we've been seeing over the past year is indeed worrisome. I don't want to blame COVID for all of it, but people are locked up inside. They're spending more time on social networks, at their computers. That has a bearing. And we have seen an increase in threats and also insulting remarks regarding elected officials. Now, if I could just share a couple of figures as to what we are seeing. In 2019-2020, we looked at 273 files which met the criteria of IMVE. And then we broke them down in terms of out of that 273 files, there were 65 that were racially driven or ethno-nationalistically driven with a violent extremism flavour. And then there was about 1/5 that were anti-authority. that stood against government's decisions, government directives. They're against law and order, against the police. And then there are 29 files, which...
To leave the answer there, but those are very important statistics, and I rather hope you're able to work them into other questions. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to Mr. Helwig from CSIS. You've got your third tier. You've identified these groups as a propensity for some violent activity, and you indicate that meets a threshold for, I presume, for your powers to take disruptive action. Can you tell us what kind of disruptive action CSIS might undertake in these circumstances? What tools do you have? What kind of things do you do?
Unfortunately, in this venue, and I really do appreciate the question, I can't get into operational methodologies or discuss what we do in that space. I can say, though, given the nature of the MV threat and the importance that we put on it as an organization, we've dedicated a number of resources, as I mentioned earlier, our regional offices, our overseas offices connected with foreign partners to understand this threat a little bit more. We have a number of tools at our disposal. There are more that we need to make sure that we have in our toolbox, and some of that is going to require looking at the CSIS Act and making sure that it is fit for purpose so that we can properly identify and deal with all of these threats. A big part of the issue, though, is deconflicting early and often with our law enforcement partners and making sure that our respective mandates are brought to bear.
Sorry, you're chewing up time, but you're not telling us anything. But thank you very much for your attempt. Are there very many occasions where you have people being recruited to go away, such as the Azov battalion in Ukraine, where Canadians have been identified as 14 Canadians traveling to the Ukraine to train with extremists? Is that something that's common?
I can say that in the early days, there was some travel to various countries under the IMVE rubric. Given the COVID restrictions, we've seen a lot less of that travel, obviously, for a variety of reasons. But we're very actively monitoring that type of activity. Thank you.
You've got 15 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. And this would be as part of recruitment. Is that something that's also active in these organizations?
I would say it's a whole host of things. I would say it's recruitment. I would say it's getting together. I would say it's networks. I would say it's all of those things.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Currick, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and let me thank all of the witnesses for being here today. Just curious, there's one of you mentioned 273 investigations regarding IMVE, if I recall correctly, just from your previous testimony. I'm wondering if you have similar numbers for politically and religiously motivated instances as well. If you have similar numbers to that.
So on the, they're just grouped into one. I'll just go through the numbers again just to make sure. There was 273 files that we categorized under the IMVE that looked at certain criteria that fall under the IMVE, and of that, there's 165 are racially and ethno-nationalist motivated violent extremists, RMVE category, if you wish. And there's approximately 1/5 of the IMVE files were in the anti-authority category. So these could be derogative comments towards a government, not necessarily all elected members, but there's people appointed in key positions that are providing messages on certain issues that we see an uptick also there. So anti-law enforcement grievances and motivations. So that would be the 1/5 of the 273. And then of the 29 files related to incel violence, and the remaining files were related to the range of other grievance and ideology, like conspiracy theories with QAnon, COVID-19, and threats to elected members.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm curious. I've read about how there are some barriers to convicting violent extremists because intelligence cannot easily be entered into the the court system, and there's some conflicts that exist with that. So I'm curious to ask. I think the RCMP and CSIS, what tools are needed in terms to ensure that that the evidence that's collected, the information that is found, can actually be entered into resulting in convictions?
Mr. Chair, I'll take that question.
Okay.
So thank you for the question. And there are definitely tools required with respect to intel to evidence. It's a priority area for us. But the approach that we're taking from a law enforcement perspective is always focused on that public safety. And if you look at statistics around terrorism convictions or terrorism offenses and charges, you'll note that the numbers are not high. And from a law enforcement perspective, we are taking the first opportunity to impact the individuals that are involved and prevent them from moving forward in that violent space. So that can be a simple knock on the door, letting them know. It can be adding a particular group or advocating for the addition of a particular group to the listings so that people know that that behavior is not acceptable and will disassociate themselves. You'll see recent charges related to firearms offenses, uttering threats, charges in relation to possession of explosives, attacks against critical infrastructure, et cetera. So as law enforcement, even though those challenges do exist from the intel that may give us a much better awareness of the totality of the problem, we are leveraging those opportunities that already exist where there's legislative elements that can be applied to ensure that action is taken and there's early intervention.
Okay, thank you very much for that. In the recent Bill C-59, Conservatives proposed an intelligence to evidence legal process to allow intelligence into courts to help get intelligence into evidence under a judicial review process without revealing sources, which we've heard is a significant challenge. Would something like that make it easier for prosecutors to pursue convictions of those that would perpetrate terrorism and these violent extremist actions, especially with some of these transnational groups and various other hate entities?
Difficult question to be answered in 30 seconds, Mr. Flynn.
To be honest, I'm not sure where to start with answering that. So, like I said, there's definitely issues around the intel and the evidentiary process and finding the appropriate balance between protection of those intel sources that do aid us greatly in understanding how to prioritize some of the work that we're doing and the threat that, based on the threat that groups pose, is always a real balance. There are already some legislated protection mechanisms, Section 38 and Section 37 of the Canada Evidence Act that apply. And from a law enforcement perspective, the more tools we have and the more assistance we have in bringing evidence forward before judges to make a determination of guilt is obviously of significant benefit to us.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk, and thank you, Mr. Flynn, for making some effort to answer a very difficult question. Mr. Lightbound, 5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all our witnesses right off the bat. First, for the service you provide to Canadians and to Canada to keep our communities and cities and towns safe. Thank you for your testimony today, which is highly poignant, pertinent, which speaks to how important it is for this committee to address IMVE. My first question is for the CSE. We heard last week the president or chair of the NCCOP committee who stated that the nature of violent extremism is far more diffuse than it was when it was based on Al-Qaeda or Daesh, and that there's a number of diffuse actors that come into play. And so there's a whole multiplicity of means of communication, underground ways of communicating. There's Parler, Telegram, Dub. These are new communication platforms. And the chair, in his report, said that there are thousands of ways of extremists, often far-right extremists, to communicate. So what kind of a challenge is that for the communications security establishment, and how are you adapting to that new landscape?
Again, Mr. Wilczynski, we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I guess I have to push harder. Excuse me, Monsieur Lightbound.
Yes, Mr. Lightbound, thank you very much for the question. That is a crucial issue when it comes to foreign intelligence. That is better understanding the different ways that these extremist groups and actors communicate. What motivates them? What are the strategies that they use to advance their agenda? Is it a challenge for us? Well, yes, indeed it is. And we're working in partnership with the other intelligence agencies that are appearing before you today in order to define what the threats are, where we need to target our efforts so that we can take the necessary steps so that my colleagues can do so that we can foster Canadian security and safety. Well, thank you. My question will now be for the CSIS. You said that COVID-19 had, in fact, intensified this xenophobic and racial feelings among some groups, also anti-authoritarian movements. Have some groups that were focused on racism and conspiracy theories and anti-authority and anti-health measures, well, it's been reported in the media that there's an openly racist group. Many of its members actually went into and infiltrated and became part of anti-health measure groups, conspiracy theorists. Have you seen that kind of movement and fluidity between groups often?
Yeah, it's a super great question. Yes, we do. We see that movement often. And that movement happens quite frequently when there's a new social event that galvanizes either a conspiracy theory or some individual's intent to act. Specifically with the COVID-19, we have seen various groups that previously weren't aligned or individuals that perhaps were not sharing the same ideology or the same motivation come together under a common cause, whether that is anti-government activity, whether that is anti-vaccination activity. So we do see that fluidity very often. It makes our investigative efforts extremely difficult. It makes our analytical efforts difficult because it's very important for all of us witness today to be able to identify those threats early and often so we can make sure that we're well positioned to identify them and inform the government accordingly. Thank you.
You have about half a minute. Well, it was just peut-être.
Well, still for CSIS again, you mentioned in your testimony that in these IMVE groups, it's easier to move from one sort of grouping to another than those within the religiously motivated violent extremism groups. Why is there greater fluidity in the IMVE?
There's many factors to that in answering your question, but one of the factors is there's no common ideology that binds these groups often. They come from very different vectors of society. They have different personal grievances, and they come together for one specific purpose, and then they diffuse again and go elsewhere. In the RMVE space, we have traditional threat actors that have one common ideology that they all follow. So it's a very difficult and different circumstances, and hence why we have really tried to identify and articulate the different groupings and why it is that these activities are different. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lightbound. That completes our second round of questions. Third round of questions, 5 minutes, Mr. Kirk, and then Madame Kara.
Thank you very much. I would ask Mr. Flynn, was there any further comments that you wanted to add before my time ran out previously, or I can move on to the next question? But I want to give you the opportunity to finish your thought.
I would go ahead with the next question. I think I finished it as best I could, challenged by the question.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So I do want to ask again regarding Bill C-59. So probably Mr. Flynn would be best fit to answer this. But it raised the threshold to apply for terrorism-based reconnaissance warrants and didn't change the legal requirements to have one granted. Essentially, made it harder to apply for a warrant against a terrorist, but it's the same as before to get a warrant. How many warrant applications are the RCMP or CISA seeking per year under this new system? Do you have numbers for that?
Sorry, I do not have any of those numbers available today. I'm not sure if maybe CISA has any information with respect to that.
I also don't have active numbers on how many warrants we're seeking. I can tell you that it is an active conversation we have in this building every day about trying to get more warrants before the federal court, and it's something that we're working with our justice colleagues on achieving, but I do not have specific numbers.
Okay, so I'd ask the question again: are there any specific tools that are needed to ensure that that law enforcement and investigative authorities have the necessary tools required to accomplish the objectives and mandates that you have?
It's a question that generally kind of you're straying into the area of what should be properly addressed to a minister as opposed to people who work for the government. I'm sure they have their own thoughts, but I'm not sure that they can actually share those thoughts. But all of the people before us are very sophisticated witnesses. So with that caveat, I'm going to suggest that anyone who wishes to take up Mr. Couric's question may.
I will take a stab at that.
Sure, thanks.
Bravely. I'll give you one example. We're quite proud of the work we're doing in the service on our outreach. We've been actively engaged with academia, with biopharma during the COVID pandemic. We've been engaged with NSERC about FI threats to various educational institutions. We're really out there and we're engaging. One of the things that we have an issue with that we're trying to address is in our engagement with non-security cleared individuals under Section 19 of our Act. We are only allowed to provide unclassified information. This makes it difficult for us to really, provide information to the community that they need that is useful to protect them and to make sure that they're resilient against the threats that are coming our way. So when we talk about the service and the CSIS Act not being fit for purpose, these are one of the things that I think we need to look at in the future. Thank you.
If time permits, I can add to that from an
Go ahead. I'm sure Mr. Couric will be happy with that.
Please.
So outside of any legislative ask, internally to the RCMP in collaboration with CSIS, we're doing significant work at looking at what we can do better internally and collectively. So we've implemented new programs after an operational improvement review. We're implementing a LEADS program where we collaborate at the early onset of knowledge around a problem. We're bringing psychologists into the police response to these problems so we can better understand the people and what will aid in moving them away from the violent extremism or offer early opportunity to mitigate the harm that may cause or move them away. And I could go on several different routes, but I think that would use up more time than available.
No, about a minute, Mr. Couric.
Okay, I'll hopefully make this quick. I'm very curious about the foreign influence aspect of this and some of the efforts to destabilize our democracy. Wondering if there's any comments that any of you, maybe CSIS or CSE, has on those foreign influence and their impact on Canada related to IMVE.
I can start. Foreign interference is one of the most important strategic threats to Canada's national security. CSIS director has mentioned this at numerous venues. It undermines Canadian sovereignty, our national interests, and specifically our values. It is a very complex threat. It's also a national threat. It targets all levels of government, as you know, communities and all communities across the country. The threat activity has always been persistent in the FI space in Canada, but the scale, speed, range, and impact have grown considerably as a result of globalization and technology. It encompasses a range of techniques, including human intelligence operation, state-sponsored or foreign-influenced media, and sophisticated cyber tools. And I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Wyszynski, can talk further to that, but it is a significant threat that we are absolutely seized with from a CSIS perspective. Thank you.
I'm sure Mr. Wyszynski would love to answer that, but he's not going to be given an opportunity because Mr. Kirk is out of time. So, Madame Kara, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all our witnesses for being here, and more importantly, for all the work that you do. My question is for CSIS. Back in 2010, 2011, Canadians were informed by the government of the day that the right-wing extremism has not been a significant problem in Canada, and that the antics of certain high-profile white supremacists were extremely rare. Since that time, we've seen proliferation of threats posed by IMVE, such as incels and those inspired by xenophobia. How can we explain this growth? Were these threats always significant and perhaps they were not addressed, or was there truly a rapid increase that may have been spurred by external forces over the past few years?
It's a very good question. It's a complicated question, but if I go back in time, when we still had the nomenclature of right-wing extremism, and we had the attacks in Quebec, and we had some other attacks. At that time, just for context, we were dealing 2014 with the attacks against Parliament Hill. And a lot of other attacks that fit more into the religiously motivated violent extremism. So this is an exercise that all of us undertake at all times. It's reprioritizing threats and allocating the resources to deal with those threats. With the reemergence of the IMVE and the recalibration that we took as a service, we absolutely saw, to the second part of your question, we saw a more sophisticated threat actor than we had seen before. You had new online tools, you had new ways of communication, you had accelerated interaction where these people could sit in their basements and never have to meet face to face. This accelerated the IMVE space, and it's actually just grown ever since then, making it very difficult and complex to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arthur, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that for asking. But I think that to go back to what Mr. Hollweg said and part of the earlier questions, I just want to emphasize that this truly is a global phenomenon, and that when we're engaging with international partners, when we're talking to our Five Eyes colleagues, this is something that is increasingly on colleagues' radar. And from a foreign intelligence perspective, it's why we believe that we need to continue to be engaged in this question, and again, to work with our colleagues at CSIS and other clients to make sure that the international dimension of it, the global nature of it, is understood, and how those connect to the phenomenon as it may manifest itself in Canada.
Thank you for that. And just as an additional, question for CSIS or even perhaps the RCMP, we are aware that gender-based violence is a very serious threat, and I know we're developing a national strategy to address it. In CSIS's opening remarks, you did mention that one of the, faces of this violence is misogynistic. Can you maybe perhaps explain a little bit further on how IMVE is gender-driven?
Thank you for your question. When we look at groups such as incel, involuntary celibate, that ideology bears many of the hallmarks of many more traditional recognized ideologies from our perspective. Incel belongs to a misogynistic community of males. They associate primarily through online platforms, like most others do. Though they use a unified terminology, they're not really an organized group from our perspective, and they have no centralized structure or planning. They believe, though, at their core, that their genetics determine the quality of their life and relationships. And meaning that they blame their unattractive physical features for their inability to attract women. They attribute their perceived failings in life to women and society in general. We're also seeing subcategories of these types of ideologies. Manosphere has become one that has cropped up. This is a network of online misogynistic and male supremacy communities. Talking about men's rights issues to glorify the violence and violent misogynies. These subgroups are very concerning to us. But from a service perspective, I would say not all of them are violent. So from a service perspective, in terms of the act and meeting our threshold, a lot of that activity takes place in that first tier that I was talking about, but is absolutely something that is concerning from a national perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Cara. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, IMVE, or rather RMVE, which relies on social media, is a very modern kind of threat, and therefore it's difficult to legislate on. As you said, Mr. Jerome, people will find a way of circumventing that new legislation, which makes them useless. And you're familiar with the Christchurch massacre. The Prime Minister of New Zealand said that this was an action that was to be broadcast on the internet. And then Australia passed legislation to enhance this security, and it amended the criminal code in Australia to make it a criminal offence to broadcast or stream content of a violent nature on the internet. In your opinion, should Canada pass similar legislation? Well, I'll defer to Mr. Rochon when it comes to to the theme that you just raised. Well, thank you. Well, I don't want to...
Might want to step in from a public safety perspective in terms of Canada's participation in the Christchurch call. We certainly have been supportive, standing shoulder to shoulder with our New Zealand colleagues. There's a 2-year anniversary event that's coming up later this week. But Jill, care to maybe weigh in on Madame Michaud's question?
Just again, the same caution I gave to Mr. Carrick, that it's properly a minister's question as to the kind of whether there should be some legislative initiative. But you all seem to be brave souls, and you certainly do have opinions. So I'll just let it proceed from there.
Great, thank you. Merci pour la question. I think that I won't comment on government policy in terms of legislation, but I would say that as my colleagues have described, there really are a variety of tools that can be brought to bear, whether they're legislative tools, working with civil society organizations, voluntary work that can be done with between governments and social media platforms and digital industry. And that's certainly a big focus of, in fact, the Christchurch call that my colleague was just speaking about, where there's a series of commitments for governments, commitments for the technology companies, and shared commitments. And I would say that one of the elements of that is, and something that we've been working on here, is developing, there's the legislative aspect, but there's also crisis protocols that can be put into place. So when there are activities, streaming activities happening, as in the case of Christchurch, that we can mobilize quickly to work with companies to make sure that content is no longer disseminated. And so that's another tool that we can use. But legislation, I think, is one part of the picture.
Okay, thank you, Madame Michaud. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question, that perhaps the representative from CSIS could deal with this as well. We have, of course, reports of activity by extremist groups within the military. The gentleman who, Mr. Huron, who went to, I call him a gentleman, not advisedly perhaps, went to Rideau Hall with a truck load of weapons and broke down the gate, was a military reservist. And we're told that there are pockets of supporters of the extremist view within the military. Do you actively engage in investigations regarding the military, or is that left to the military police?
Thank you for your question. So the service is actively involved and engaged with the military on IMVE and all other manners of threat activity. What I can say is, if there's an individual within the military that meets our threshold to investigate or engage our TRM authority, just because they're in the military won't stop us from doing our job. But we actively engage with the military in terms of education, frontline education, where we get out there and we say, these are some of the things you might want to look for. If you are concerned, these are some of the things that we're seeing analytically, investigatively on MV, and try and educate them so that they're better able to spot some of these issues on their own. Thank you.
Have you been able to, we know there are, according to statistics, there's about 1,250 police officers in the military police, but so they have a lot of personnel. But have your service noticed that there is perhaps some more often than not that you have military personnel that you come across? Is that something that happens often? And do you refer them to military police, or do you carry on as if it was anybody else?
While I can't get into specific investigative activities or files, I can say that globally the IMVE phenomena has increased. So in every pocket of society, we're seeing more of that activity. So I think it might be natural that we're seeing that in that area as well, and we're actively engaged in dialogue with our D&D colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Van Popta, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Just going to follow up on a line of questioning from Madam Michaud just a couple of minutes ago about legislative frameworks for combating online extremism and violence. It's not a question so much about legislation, but probably more of a technical question. And I'm not a technician myself at all, but probably for Mr. Wyszynski, do we have the technological tools to be able to identify and prevent online or disrupt online communities that are fostering violence of any sort?
Again, we have the same problem. Okay, press your button harder. Yeah.
I'm pressing it as hard as I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Speaking of technological challenges, I apologize. Thank you for the question. Again, I'll just go back to CSC's core mandate, which really and SIGINT in particular, which is foreign intelligence and collection of foreign intelligence. So the types of activities that you mention in terms of our collection authorities are ones that are not necessarily consistent, again, with the legislation that we have. In terms of the recent legislation, the passage of the Bill C-59 with the CSE Act, we do have an active cyber operations mandate. However, thresholds, proportionality are all very important considerations that we need to bear in mind. We are very cognizant of the importance of freedom of expression. There's a fairly high threshold that we have to look at, and I think that from our perspective, from CSE's point of view, we'd be very, very cautious in that space.
Thank you very much. Do you get into recognizance warrants at all? Is that under your jurisdiction, or should I be asking that question of the RCMP?
Okay, I think we're going to have to pass the hat and get you a decent headset. Okay, try it again.
Trying. Can you hear now?
You got it. You got it now. Yes.
I was simply passing the question on. That's not in our mandate.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so maybe to the Mr. Duhem, RCMP, recognizance warrants are an extraordinary tool. How important are they? How of an important a tool is that in your toolbox for preventing violence in Canada?
So thank you, it's Mark Flynn. I'll take that question. I'm going to assume when you say recognizance warrant that you're probably referring to the terrorist peace bond or similar. So very important tool for us. We use it early on when an individual is identified as a risk and associated to or revealing potential to be involved in a terrorist activity through association with other terrorists, online posts related to that material. Highly valued tool, allows us to intervene early, ensure there's awareness, apply an appropriate level of restrictions through the courts on the individual and their association with others or a certain activity. So highly valuable tool utilized by our organization and other police in Canada.
Good, thank you. Is that used internationally at all in cooperation with other public safety services around the world?
So in the RCMP's investigations, we collaborate with our partners globally, and terrorism being not restricted to Canada's domestic or geographical footprint. So as long as we have jurisdiction or there's a connection with an international body, we will collaborate frequently. And sometimes you'll see an individual being subjected to terrorism like peace bonds or other measures, depending on the country, in multiple countries at the same time.
Good, thank you. I have a minute or two yet, Mr. Chair.
No, you have about 30 seconds, but go ahead.
Okay, just a quick question, probably for CSIS. CSIS has identified Daesh and Al Qaeda as being particularly organized on the internet to raise funds and to recruit and to organize. Is that the same degree of sophistication and threat from IMV organizations or individuals?
Thank you for the question. I would say that the traditional organizations have had a lot longer to get organized, and therefore they're able to do that a lot more frequently and in a sustained fashion. And given the fluidity that I described of the IMV threat and the not so much connective tissue with the various individuals that are there, I would say that the RMVE methodology probably is still very tried and true. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Abropoulos, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here with us to answer our questions today. Before I forget, I think if you don't mind, if you could submit to the committee after this meeting the breakdown of the 273 ideologically motivated violent extremist events that took place in Canada. And my question is to CSIS, and it's kind of along the lines of something you already mentioned. You had mentioned the involuntary celibates group, which is a group that I've researched in the past. And you said that they are not really a violent group, but they're more online. However, that's not true because Alec Minassian drove into a crowd of pedestrians in Toronto, killing 10 people in 2018, and posted on Facebook that the incel rebellion had begun. What more does it take for a group to be considered violent?
So apologize if I misspoke on that, or but that's not what I said. I think what I said was that not all people in that group are violent. There certainly absolutely are, and he represents one of those individuals for sure. So I totally agree. Once they mobilize to that level of violence, absolutely that is meeting our threshold from a CSIS perspective.
Is this group considered a terrorist group in Canada?
Incel is not, Dom, I'll have to defer to you, but they are not a listed terrorist entity if memory serves.
Indeed not. I think incel is more, we're getting involved in terminology here. Incel is the ideology, and there are a whole bunch of groups that fall in within that ideology. It's like saying, is IMVE a terrorist group? Incel is an ideology that involves a whole bunch of different people, and there are groups that could fall under the category, and if they were to meet the threshold in the criminal code, then they would become a listed entity. Hopefully that was
okay.
clear.
Thank you very much. And in your testimony earlier, you mentioned that you mentioned several of the different incidents that have taken place, including Christchurch, Quebec City Mosque, Pittsburgh, different attacks that took place against specific religious groups. We've talked about addressing online harms and implementing red flag laws as measures that could ensure that people who pose a risk to others do not have access to firearms. What additional measures can we take in order to detect and prevent such attacks in the future?
Not sure who's.
So I could. I'm not quite sure who it's directed to, but I think it begins with public vigilance and reporting. It's very important when people see something, report it. There's patterns that can be detected early on with different posts that could lead the service for disruption or the RCMP to investigate and lay charges before something happened. And the police or the service, it's impossible to monitor everything that's going on in the internet. But it starts with public vigilance and reporting when you see it.
I would very much agree with that and add that from our perspective, getting out into the communities and educating people as to what that looks like and what people should be advising the police is extremely important. And this committee and the work that you're doing is also very beneficial to get the word out there and to show people that the government's taking this issue seriously. Thank you.
I have about a minute left.
Thank you. I'll pass on my time.
Okay, colleagues, that brings us to the end of the third round. We have about 20 minutes available for these very excellent witnesses. And if you could indicate to the clerk, my proposal would be another 4-minute round for each of the parties or a 3-minute round for each of the parties. But in the meanwhile, while you're making up your minds, and if you could communicate to the clerk, I just take the opportunity to ask a question or two on my own. All of you have extraordinary experience as investigators. And what has struck me on a lot of these organizations is the, if you will, the borderline mental illness of some of the people that you would be conducting investigations on. Paranoia, disassociation from reality, conspiracies, all that sort of stuff. And I'd be interested in your thoughts as to what element in your investigations actually is possibly is mental illness of some kind or another.
So, Mr. Chair, from an RCMP perspective, I would say mental illness is a very significant element. And if you look at during the COVID situation that we're in right now, there's lots of reporting about the increased mental illness that is being caused by this isolation that's in place. And I, as an opinion, I would say that there is likely a connection between some of the increases that we're seeing as well as the movement to online. In some of our police investigations, in fact, we've had one that's underway right now. I won't get into too many details of it, but I'll say that it's actually an individual who is currently in a mental institution that is under investigation, and we've already intervened with that individual. So I can't think of a better example than that to demonstrate the connectivity between this issue and mental illness.
Just direct that question to Mr. Hallwig as well. and CSIS gets in before the police get in, shall we say? It is an investigation. It's not evidence. I'm sure you've made some observations about mental illness and some of these individuals. Just curious as to what your thoughts are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like our RCMP colleagues, we have absolutely seen more of this, and we have become very alive to some of the mental health indicators that allow us to make better assessments at the front end in terms of what we can or should be doing from an investigative perspective. A lot of our work involves dealing with community members who might be better served to preemptively deal with individuals rather than provoking investigative authorities from CSIS. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, do you wish to ask further questions, or do we terminate the meeting here? Jack?
Yeah, I just have a question, a follow-up on the incel numbers that Commissioner Duhaime mentioned. Of the 273 files, that 29 of them, which would be more than 10%, would be related to incel, which seems to be high to me, since it's a group I never heard of before 2018. Is how large is that group, or how large is it compared to others in terms of numbers of people that are involved? I think there was a big explanation of what they are, but is this prolific within society?
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Again, it's an ideology. It's not a group, so I wouldn't be able to put an exact number. But it's not considered a group. It's a pocket of single individuals that have the same ideology. So I would not be able to put a number on that.
Okay, Mr. Lightbound, I think you've got another question.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Peut-être une petite...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, perhaps a final question for Mr. Rochon. You spoke about the Community Centre for the Prevention of Violence. Could you elaborate on that and tell us what it does exactly? About a year ago, the New York Times team had followed a young person who got radicalized over the internet and fell into far right-wing extremism. We saw everything that he did in YouTube, on the internet, on social media to bring him to that point. What kind of research is that centre engaging in, and how do you take individuals who are unfortunately on the track of radicalization and take them and put them on a new track? Great question. Well, that centre falls under the purview of Mr. Werrett, so I'll hand the floor to him and he'll provide further information.
Merci pour la question, Mr. Lightbound.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Light.
For community engagement and prevention of violence was formally launched in 2017, and it is really a centre of excellence in terms of coordinating the Government of Canada's efforts related to countering radicalization to violence. So complementing some of the security responses that you've heard about today through an emphasis on prevention and intervention. And so the Canada Centre is focused on all types of radicalization to violence, regardless of ideology or political or religious motivations. And as outlined in the National Strategy on Countering Radicalization to Violence that was issued several years ago, there are 3 priority areas that the centre is looking at. One is building, sharing, and using knowledge. So that's really building up the knowledge base that we have in Canada and internationally. Second is addressing radicalization to violence in the online space. As you know well from the conversation today, that's a preeminent concern currently. And the third is supporting frontline interventions. And to be clear, the Canada Centre itself does not work directly with individuals at risk or those who have radicalized to violence. But what we do have is the Community Resilience Program, which is a $7 million a year funding program that provides financial assistance both for some of the research efforts that I talked about in terms of our building knowledge, but also to support frontline practitioners and community-based organizations that prevent and counter radicalization to violence in Canada. So that's where those kinds of organizations are dealing with some of the individuals who've indicated some signs of radicalizing to violence. And to date, we funded about 42 projects across Canada. Some, again, are research projects, but a large part of that funding goes to prevention and intervention programs. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Kirk has his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in the room and there's a big screen here. I'm just wondering with Mr. Hollig, his pin. It's kind of a funny question, but I'm just wondering his pin. It kind of pixelates and looks a little bit strange. Just the pin on his lapel. In the room, I can see the big screen. As you can see, I'm wearing a pin with a Canadian flag, and the lapel pin there. It's pixelated and not easy to see. So sorry to ask a funny question, but
well, that is a strange question. I don't know what to do with it, but apparently pixelation is a bad thing.
I will remove it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, but let me just finish with Commissioner Duhaime. I thought towards the end of your recitation of the 276 files or whatever, you talked about threats again to politicians or to political folks. Can you expand on that? Has it been increased? Has it decreased? I dare say that there's not anyone on this call that hasn't received some sort of threat of some kind or another. Could you expand on what your observations might be?
So on the 273, there's about 1/5 of them that we see that you see the majority, which include anti-government and anti-law enforcement. What we're seeing is disparaging remarks, condescending remarks towards elected officials or appointed officials. Sometimes I would say that most of the times, or a lot of the times, they don't meet the criminal threshold to lay a charge. Yeah. And that's where we do some disruption, where the team, the team that looks after it does work with the behavioral science team, trying to get a better understanding of the individuals. There's mental health issues involved in this, but often what we've been seeing is a simple knock on the door is enough to disrupt it, and the person doesn't repeat it. People feel sometimes safe in their basement, feel protected because they're online, they're not face to face, but a simple disruption is just as good. So increase, yes, I mentioned earlier on that we've seen an increase from what we are looking at towards not necessarily all elected members, but at one point it was ministers, and that's for my personal opinion. What we're seeing is due to COVID, people being at the residence, like I said, feeling protected on that internet. We did see an increase of negative comments, I'll say, not always threats. Yeah. And I think Mark would like to add something to this, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I'd like to add some information about a program that we have that I'm quite proud of, and I think it has application in the national security IMBE space outside of the security of protected individuals under the RCMP's mandate. In our protective policing program, we have behavioral scientists who review the intelligence or evidence that comes in with respect to threats and the individuals that are involved, and we put those people into defined categories with defined follow-up regimes based on the level of threat, particularly when they don't meet the criminal threshold where there's likely going to be a conviction based on their activity. So a very new approach that we've been undertaking in the last few years. Very highly skilled group that are developing these assessments as well as the plans to intervene. That can go anywhere from a regimented monthly follow-up with public health officials, psychological services, counseling, etc., to someone who's at the very low end of the threshold, having potentially annual follow-ups to determine whether or not they are increasing their activity or decreasing. But very effective group, and very proud of the service that they provide.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Commissioner Duhaime, your knock on the door analogy coincides with my own experience, which the irony was that it was a former police officer who got the knock on the door. So I see two hands up, and I think that'll have to do for today. We'll go with Mr. Fisher, then Ms. Damoff.
Thank you very much. I think Pam had her hand up first, but you know, someone said today, if Canadians see something, they should say something. How best should Canadians, if they feel that they are seeing something that might be IMVE, how would they best go about reporting something like that?
So I can't shy away. I was the one who said that. So on the national security side for the RCMP, there is a 1-800 number, 1-800-420-5805. But I think the underlying message here for the Canadian population is call your local police, call the police jurisdiction. We have ties in different provinces with the POJs. They understand roles and responsibilities and mandate. If it's imminent, obviously 911, and there's other ways to contact your police of jurisdiction to inform that. And to me, that's very important because, as I said, it's not the law enforcement, the security community that will be able to detect everything that's going on. Most of the work that we're doing in this space is being reported to us by citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Madame Damoff, final question.
Thank you, Chair. So often Canadians are fearful of extremism that is coming from abroad. And I don't know that the awareness about this ideologically motivated violent extremism and the number of Canadians who have died because of, I know in the last Parliament, Minister Goodale would call it these lone wolves who are motivated by this type of ideology. I'm just wondering how important is it for Canadians to recognize that this is a threat to us and that the threat is actually on our own soil by people who are being radicalized not by foreign fighters, but being radicalized right here in Canada because they're online and being part of these groups. I'm not sure who wants to, Mr. Duhem or over to CSIS, whichever.
I can.
Okay,
go ahead, Mike.
I'll start off, and Tim, and I see Mark had his hand on the microphone. So just very quickly, the challenging part in this is the spectrum of activity that gets the person to actually commit the act. It's a little bit like when the radicalization aspect, it's not illegal to be radicalized. It's when you get to the point where you're doing that criminal offense that it becomes an offense. And that there is a difficult space to really identify when the individual will commit that act. And that is a challenge. There's a spectrum of activity, and to get to that single point, what triggers that person to do it sometimes is difficult to identify. I'll pass it over to Mark, who would like to add something.
So with respect to public awareness, it's absolutely critical. If people understand that the threat exists and apply a better awareness to it, they have the ability themselves to counter some of this dangerous narrative that's out there, as well as report it to police and other security and intelligence partners. So from a policing perspective, one of the strongest tools that we have is public awareness and public involvement in resolving the issue or addressing what we can of the issue.
Mr. Holloway, last word.
I would echo those comments. Education is key. Through the CSIS report, annual report, NSI COP report, CERC reviews, all of these forums are meant to educate on this threat, but frontline education in dealing with people is the number one most effective way. And the irony of this space in the MV is most of the abhorrent material is actually domestically produced. So I would say education is key. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And thank you on behalf of the committee, and individually, I want to thank you for your service to our country. Many of you go underappreciated because it's the necessary hazard of the job, but I think publicly you should be acknowledged for the tremendous service you do provide to our country. And I also want to thank you for appearing here today on short notice and putting up with the vagaries of parliamentary calendars. And you've been very generous with your time, and we appreciate it. And you certainly got our study off to a flying start. So with that, colleagues, I think we will retire, and Mr. Harris can now feed his nutritional needs. And Mr. Fisher is going to also do the same, sharing a meal with Mr. Harris, no doubt. Thank you very much, and we'll talk later.
Thanks,
Meeting
everybody.
adjourned.
Thank you. Take care.